Hello, this is part 6 and the last part in my series of commentaries on Jordan Peterson's book, Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life. In this part, I'll be talking about rules 10, 11, and 12. And just like previous parts, I'll be reading my notes. If you'd like to just go directly to my notes, the link is provided in the description. Rule 10 says, plan and work diligently to maintain the romance in your relationship. As this rule suggests, the chapter is about marriage and the work it takes to maintain a happy marriage. A relationship is like an organism. It is organized, it has its own distinct aims, and it can be helped or hurt by external forces. Married people might find themselves busy with work, busy with kids, drawn to some solitary hobbies, or drawn to friends outside of the marriage. They might, as a result, neglect their marriage, and that neglect could be combined with the belief that if something is not right with a marriage, it cannot be helped, it cannot improve. They might not try to improve things in the marriage, partly because of that belief that it cannot be done, and partly because making an attempt would make them feel vulnerable. It would put them in a vulnerable position because their partner might make fun of them, reject them, or ridicule them. As I was writing the previous paragraph, I was reminded of those strings of letters and or numbers that memory researchers give their research participants. The string of letters or any bunch of meaningless symbols is given to research participants. And in order to keep that kind of string in memory, we have to rehearse them. So the string must be rehearsed. Perhaps in its own way, a marriage needs to be rehearsed, repeated, certain things in it repeated, attended to. We could also talk about this with respect to the rhythm of a marriage. For a relationship to thrive, to be maintained, its rhythm has to be understood and preserved. Peterson doesn't talk about the rhythm or the organization of a marriage, though his advice in this area seems sound. His exploration of marriage also leads to exploring other areas, other topics, including negotiation, desire, principles, as in living in accordance to a shared set of principles. Noticing the mystery of another person, how seeing the mystery in your partner is important. This chapter could be connected to rules 7 and 8. It is connected to rule 7 because marriage is a commitment, and that chapter was about commitments, and marriage is a commitment that cultivates the person just like any other commitment. We become who we are partly as a consequence of our sustained commitments to relationships. This chapter is also connected to, or could connect it more explicitly to rule 8, because the attitude of creating one beautiful room in a home here takes the form of making time, making one space every once in a while, like a small room for marriage. Here that would take the form of making some time once or twice a week for one's relationship. We should be mindful that Peterson is providing philosophical justification for convention here when he talks about marriage. We don't have to choose. So this is where Peterson is actually very helpful to some people. We don't have to choose between, on one hand, being a free spirit and creating a completely new lifestyle and thinking about that, how we are creating that. And on the other hand, mindlessly and habitually falling into convention. So those are not our only options. Peterson is showing his conservative readers can have a reflective and philosophical relationship with their conservative and conventional decisions, including marriage. Even if you find his discussion limited, he is providing a starting point for a philosophical relationship with marriage, a way of being reflective about relationships. We can then build on that if you're interested. The reason why I find his discussion unsatisfactory is because this level of emphasis on a convention like marriage excludes people who, for whatever reason, might not be interested in it, that form of romantic relationship. Not to mention people for whom it's not even an option. So let me share something with you here. This is something that I translated recently. Here's a passage. Obligation has nothing to do with love, because loving is the exercise of freedom. Marriage, in comparison, is an economic deal, irrelevant to the heart. It wipes out all traces of sweetness. Its beginning resembles the beginning of a war. Marriage is a ravenous beast with many demands. First, it wants a house, then a family, And having a family means participating in an orgy, a public orgy that destroys the human and its desire for a private love. Family, once established, demands protection. It doesn't matter if you suffer, if your love is sacrificed in the process. Family is proclaimed as a treasure chest filled with uncles, aunts, grandfathers, kids, and all the other things that demand protection from you. This is the demand of society. This is my loose and free translation from a little book called The Deal of the Gap by Ali Abdulrazai, originally in Persian. So I just included this in my discussion because I want to show radically different ways of thinking about this topic. The conventional conservative approach to marriage is not the only way. While Peterson presents marriage exclusively in light of our benefit, he says, get married, it's good for you. You will have an ally as you face the tragedies and sufferings of life. He is ignoring that marriage is, in large part, a social and public contract. It's a contract that goes well beyond the two people involved in the marriage. All right, Rule 11 and 12. I want to put these two together in finishing the review. Rule 11 says, do not allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. And Rule 12 says, be grateful in spite of your suffering. These chapters return to the importance of stories, the importance of telling and living stories. If I were to summarize Peterson's method for avoiding those three attitudes, resentfulness, deceit, and arrogance, I would say it involves finding the right story and assigning the right role to yourself within that story. He treats stories like magical spells. By getting into a story, you're casting a spell and transforming your relationship with reality. That's why stories are so important. A story brings with it a set of possibilities, a horizon. Part of being within a story, a participant in a story, has to do with the kind of future that is involved in that story, the horizon, a vision of the future. Peterson talks about why it's important to think of ourselves as worthy of care. You're someone who's worth receiving care, and then also trying to care for others when we can. So that's the kind of story that we should cultivate, we should participate in. What I don't understand is why telling a story cannot be accompanied with revising the story based on our experience of reality. Our environments change. Our environments are parts of our story, and we change, the characters in the story. So why not consider the ongoing changes and revisions to our stories? We can anticipate Peterson's response here. Peterson would say that the abstract nature of stories makes them applicable to a wide range of concrete situations. Still, a wide range of application doesn't mean universal application. It seems to me that a very likely source of resentment could be the mismatch between the story someone is trying to force upon their lives and their lived experience. And when there's a mismatch between the two, the story that you're really trying hard to live that story, to make that story be true, and the incongruent reality, that could be a source of resentment. Letting go of, if that's a valid point, then letting go of the commitment to the story might free us from the one source of resentment. Similarly, deceit and arrogance might be partly associated with attachment to a story. I'm arrogant because I'm attached to a story in which I am deserving of very high esteem, and I'm deceitful because I want other people to believe in the story that I'm trying hard to believe in. In passing, there is an interesting insight in chapter 11 about why children sometimes want to listen to the same stories again and again. Peterson thinks this can be because of children's need to grasp a story at multiple levels of abstraction. This was thought-provoking. I think this was a very interesting insight. I don't know if it accounts for all instances of children wanting to listen to a story again, but it's a very interesting hypothesis. All right, objections. What I would object strongly is the way Peterson handled veganism or vegetarianism in chapter 11, and then how he handled antinatalism, which is the ethical stance against having children. So people who adopt the antinatalist position, they argue in favor of not having kids, not bringing children into the world for moral reasons. So that discussion was in chapter 12. In both cases, he is not doing much other than aligning himself with convention and religion, the framework that gives the privileged position to humans and some natural right to humans to farm and misuse other animals. He expresses suspicion towards antinatalism, saying that there are dark motives behind it, and that people who are defending antinatalism now will get more aggressive later on and will wish to actively take human lives. These are mischaracterizations and reflect a failure to meet the arguments on rational ground. So he's getting behind it and trying to talk about the motives behind the arguments or the consequences of the argument, as opposed to talking about the argument itself. On a related note, I listened to the Peterson-Benatar debate, the debate between Jordan Peterson and David Benatar, and found Benatar to be clearly more effective and less distracted by side issues and irrelevant tangents. Benatar was more effective in making his case for antinatalism. In one of the last parts of the book, Peterson says that ultimately his position is motivated by love, that the actions he encourages in his readers, the mode of being he encourages, is in accordance with love, a love that would be willing to ignore countervailing evidence and act with hope based on trust towards creating better relationships and a better world. I am sympathetic to that. I also understand why, out of love, maybe, we might sometimes try to do more than we can, be more than what we are, to create a stronger effect, stronger than what our abilities allow. And that is at the core of my criticism of both this book and the previous 12 Rules for Life. I think Peterson is trying to do more than he can. So I wish Peterson best of luck. I don't think he would watch my review series, but I hope that his readers who watch my reviews don't get too annoyed with me and understand my critique as a sign of respect. The book is, in my opinion, the book is bad. And the reason it's bad is not because of Peterson's intelligence, knowledge, or writing ability, all of which are impressive. It's because he's trying to do and be too much, stretching himself beyond what he can do. But despite being bad, the book is worthy of critique, and in my mind, that is a compliment. As I said before, I enjoyed reading chapters 8 and 9 specifically, so 2 out of 12. I'll say more about the book if the viewers like to hear more, if there are questions and comments. But otherwise, we are at the end of this series, and I think it's time to move on to something else. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will speak with you in the next video.